Olaudah Equiano reading. Olaudah Equiano recalls the middle passage, 1789. Directions. Read the introduction paragraph in the passages below and answer the questions in the boxes as you read the passages. After you're done reading the passages, complete the A-caps questions below the reading. Introduction. Olaudah Equiano, 1745 to 1797, also known as Gustavus Vasa, was born in Benin in West Africa. When he was about 10 years old, he was kidnapped by Africans known as Aros and sold into slavery. After being sold multiple times, he was purchased by Europeans who shipped him from Barbados and then to Virginia. Ultimately, Equiano gained his freedom and moved to England, became a Christian missionary, an abolitionist, and wrote his life story. In the excerpt below, he recounted his experience of the brutal Middle Passage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. Until recently, most historians trusted Equiano's autobiography. However, in Equiano, the African, biography of a self-made man, Vincent Curretta presents evidence that suggests that Equiano was probably born in South Carolina. Although this possibility certainly undermines one's confidence in the truthfulness of Equiano's narrative, it seems likely that he drew on stories that he had heard of the Middle Passage, if indeed he did not experience it firsthand. The first object which saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast was the sea, and a slave ship, which was then riding at anchor and waiting for its cargo. These filled me with astonishment, which was soon converted into terror when I was carried on board. I was immediately handled and tossed up to see if I were sound by some of the crew, and I was now persuaded that I had gotten into a world of bad spirits, and that they were going to kill me. Their complexions too differing so much from ours, their long hair and the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm me in this belief. Indeed, such were the horrors of my view and fears at the moment that if 10,000 worlds had been my own, I would have freely parted with them all to have exchanged my condition with that of the meanest slave in my own country. When I looked around the ship too, and saw a large furnace or copper boiling, and a multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of the countenances expressing dejection and sorrow, I no longer doubted of my fate, and quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I felt motionless on the deck and fainted. When I recovered a little, I found some black people about me, who I believed were some of those who brought me on board, and had been receiving their pay. They talked to me in order to cheer me, but all in vain. I asked them if they were not to be eaten by those white men with horrible looks, red faces, and loose hair. They told me I was not. Soon after this, the blacks who brought me on board went off, and left me abandoned to despair. I now saw myself deprived of all chance of returning to my native country, or even the least glimpse of hope of gaining the shore which I now considered as friendly, and I even wished for my former slavery in preference to my present situation, which was filled with horrors of every kind, still heightened by my ignorance of what I was to undergo. I was not long suffered to indulge my grief. I was soon put down under the decks, and there I received such a salutation smell in my nostrils that I had never experienced in my life, so that, with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything. I now wished for the last friend, death, to relieve me, but soon, to my grief, two of the white men offered me edibles food, and on my refusing to eat, one of them held me fast by the hands and laid me across, I think, the windlass, which is a flat bar in a ship usually used as part of the sail, and tied my feet, while the other hit me severely. I had never experienced anything of this kind before, and although not being used to the water, I naturally figured that element was the first time I saw it, yet nevertheless, could I have got over the nettings, I would have jumped over the side, but I could not, and besides, the crew used to watch us very closely who were not chained down to the decks, lest we should leap into the water, and I have seen some of these poor African prisoners most severely cut for attempting to do so, and hourly whipped for not eating. This indeed was often the case with myself. In a little time after, amongst the poor chained men, I found some of my own nation, which in a small degree gave ease to my mind. I inquired of these what was to be done with us. They gave me to understand we were to be carried to those white people's country to work for them. I then was a little revived, and though it were no worse than working, my situation was not so desperate, but still I feared I should be put to death. The white people looked and acted, as I thought, in so savage a manner, for I had never seen among any people such instances of brutal cruelty, and this not only shown towards us blacks, but also to some of the whites themselves. I could not help expressing my fears and apprehensions to some of my countrymen. I asked them if these people had no country, but lived in this hollow place, the ship. They told me they did not, but came from a distant one. Then, said I, how come it in all our country we have never heard of them? They told me because they live so very far off. I then asked, where were their women? Had they any like themselves? I was told they had. And why, said I, do we not see them? They answered because they were left behind. I asked how the vessel could go. They told me they could not tell, but that there were cloths put upon the mast by the help of the ropes I saw. And then the vessel went on, and the white men had some spell or magic they put in the water when they left in order to stop the vessel. I was exceedingly amazed at this account, and really thought they were spirits. I therefore wished much to be from amongst them, for I expected that they would sacrifice me, but my wishes were in vain, for we were so quartered that it was impossible for any of us to make our escape. The stench of the hold while we were in the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time, and some of us had been permitted to stay in the deck for fresh air. But now that the whole ship's cargoes were confined together, it became absolutely pestilential. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number of the ships, which was so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This produced copious perspirations, so that the air soon became unfit for respiration from a variety of loathsome smells, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victim to the improvident avarice, as I may call it, for their purchasers. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains, now become insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs, into which the children often fell and were almost suffocated. The shrieks of women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole scene of horror almost inconceivable. Happily, perhaps for myself, I was soon reduced so low here that it was thought necessary to keep me almost always on deck, and from my extreme youth I was not put into fetters, chains. One day, when we had a smooth sea and moderate wind, two of my wearied countrymen, who were chained together, I was near them at the time, preferring death to such a life of misery, somehow made through the netting and jumped into the sea. Immediately, another quite dejected fellow, who, on account of his illness, was suffered to be out of irons, also followed their example, and I believe many more very soon have done the same if they had not been prevented by the ship's crew, who were instantly alarmed. Those of us who were the most active were in a moment put down under the deck, and there was such a noise and confusion amongst the people in the ships as I never heard before, to stop her and to get the boat out to go after the slaves. However, two of them were drowned, but they got the other, and afterwards flogged him unmercifully for thus attempting to prefer death to slavery. In this manner, we continue to undergo more hardships than I can now relate, hardships which are inseparable from this accursed trade. Many a time we were near suffocation from the want of fresh air, which we were often without for whole days together. This and the stench of the necessary tubs carried off many. At last, we came in sight of the island of Barbados, at which the whites on board gave a great shout and made many signs of joy to us. We did not know what to think of this, but as the vessel drew nearer, we plainly saw the harbor and the other ships of different kinds and sizes, and we soon anchored amongst them off Bridgetown, a city in Barbados, Caribbean. Many merchants and the planters now came on board, though it was in the evening. They put us in separate parcels and examined us attentively. They also made us jump and pointed to the land, signifying we were to go there. We thought by this we should be eaten by these ugly men, as they appeared to us, and when soon after they were all put down under the deck again, there was much dread and trembling among us, and nothing but bitter cries to be heard all the night from these apprehensions, insomuch that at last the white people got some old slaves from the land to pacify us. They told us we were not to be eaten, but to work, and we were soon to go to land, where we should see many of our country people. This report eased us much, and sure enough, soon after we were landed, there came to us Africans of all languages. We were conducted immediately to the merchant's yard, where we all penned up together like so many sheep in a fold, without regardless to sex or age. We were not many days in the merchant's custody before we were sold after their usual manner, which is this: on a single given, as the beat of a drum, the buyers rushed at once into the yard where the slaves were confined, and make choice of that parcel they liked best. The noise and clamor with which this is attended, and the eagerness visible in the countenance of the buyers, serve not a little and to increase the apprehensions of the terrified Africans, who may well be supposed to consider them as the ministers of that destruction to which they think themselves devoted. In this manner, without scruple, our relations and friends separated, most of them never to see each other again.